Subscribe to Keep It Terrifying for creepy tales, horror, and nightmares you won't forget. Don't miss out. Hit that subscribe button and keep it terrifying.
Part 1, Departure and Arrival. Vong had been planning his summer vacation for months. It was supposed to be simple, a quiet trip to a secluded beach in a small province, far from the bustling city life. A place where he could unwind, forget the noise, and just be alone for a while. No work, no responsibilities. Just the sun, the sea, and the sky. But as the bus rumbled down the narrow, winding roads that led out of the city, something felt off. Vong pushed the feeling aside. He was just being paranoid, he told himself. It was a long trip, and he was probably just tired. It was normal to feel a little uneasy when heading somewhere unfamiliar, right? The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the landscape. He stared out the window, watching as the city slowly faded into the distance. The trees became denser, the houses fewer. The road grew bumpier, and the air seemed to thicken with every mile. Vong couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Every so often, he would glance up at the driver in the rearview mirror, but the man's face remained expressionless, his eyes focused on the road ahead. A couple of hours into the journey, the bus stopped at a small roadside diner. Vong stepped out, stretching his legs. The air was thick with the scent of saltwater, and the low hum of the waves could be heard in the distance. It was the first real sign that he was nearing the coast. The diner was small, barely more than a shack, but it looked like it had been there for ages. The paint was peeling off the wooden walls, and the windows were covered in grime. Vong didn't think much of it, he was just passing through. But the hairs on the back of his neck stood up as he walked past it. Inside the diner, an elderly woman behind the counter greeted him with a strained smile. She was the only one there. Her eyes were unsettlingly hollow, as if she hadn't slept in days. Her hands shook slightly as she poured him a cup of coffee, the glass clinking against the saucer. The woman said nothing, but her gaze lingered on him for just a little too long. Vong felt a pang of discomfort in his stomach. "Is the beach far from here?" Vong asked, trying to make small talk. The woman's smile faltered, but she nodded slowly. "Not far," she said, her voice raspy. "You'll find it easily. Just follow the road until you see the old lighthouse. The beach is right behind it." Vong's heart skipped a beat. The mention of the lighthouse struck him as odd. The guidebook he'd read hadn't mentioned anything about a lighthouse. Still, he smiled politely and nodded, not wanting to seem rude. "I'll be on my way then," he said, finishing his coffee and heading back to the bus. As he climbed back on board, the bus driver gave him a quick glance in the rearview mirror. For a brief second, Vong thought he saw the man's lips curl into the faintest of smiles. The journey continued, the road becoming increasingly desolate. The dense trees that lined the path eventually gave way to open fields and barren hills. As they neared the beach, a thick fog began to roll in from the sea, cloaking everything in an eerie silence. The bus finally came to a stop near an old, rusted sign that read, "Welcome to Sable Bay." Vong stepped off the bus, his suitcase in hand, and took a deep breath of the salty air. The beach stretched out before him, its fine sand almost glowing in the dimming light. The water was calm, lapping gently against the shore. It was beautiful, but something felt off. The entire place had an unsettling stillness to it, like time had stopped. The sound of the waves seemed muffled, as if the sea itself was holding its breath. A figure stood near the lighthouse in the distance. The old, crumbling structure loomed against the darkening sky, its beacon long since extinguished. The figure was small, barely visible through the thick fog, but Vong could just make out the shape of a person standing there, unmoving. He shook his head, dismissing it as nothing more than a trick of the fog. He didn't want to think about it. He checked his watch. It was getting late, and the sun had dipped below the horizon. He needed to find his accommodation for the night. As he walked toward a small cluster of cottages near the beach, he noticed that the place was eerily quiet. There were no sounds of laughter or people enjoying the evening. Just the wind, the waves, and the distant hum of insects in the thickening air. A woman in her late 20s appeared from one of the cottages. She had long, dark hair and a sun-kissed complexion, though there was something oddly lifeless about her expression. Her eyes were dark circles, and she moved with a slow, almost deliberate pace. "Are you staying the night?" she asked in a flat tone. Vong nodded, wondering why the woman seemed so distant. "Just for the night," he replied. "I'm here for a quick vacation." She studied him for a moment, her gaze unsettling. "You should leave," she said softly, almost as if she were speaking more to herself than to him. "It's not safe here." Vong froze, his mouth going dry. "What do you mean?" She didn't answer, instead turning and walking back into the cottage, disappearing behind the door without a sound. A strange, gnawing sense of unease crept up his spine. "Just the beach and the lighthouse," Vong told himself. "That's all I'm here for." As night fell, Vong found his way to a small cottage that was available for rent. It was humble, but clean, with simple wooden furniture and a small bed by the window. He set his things down, trying to shake off the odd feelings he had accumulated throughout the day. As he stared out of the window, watching the waves crash against the shore, a chill ran through him. The fog was thick now, enveloping the entire beach. There was no sign of the woman, the lighthouse keeper, or anyone else. Just the endless, suffocating fog. Suddenly, Vong heard a faint whisper. It was barely audible, like the wind carrying a voice from the depths of the sea. The words were indistinct, but they sounded like a warning. He shook his head, trying to dismiss it. He needed rest. The vacation was supposed to help him forget everything. But as he lay down, the whispers continued. They were growing louder now, calling his name. And just before he closed his eyes, the faintest flicker of light appeared near the lighthouse, dancing through the mist. Just a lighthouse, he told himself. Nothing more. Part 2, The Night at Sable Bay. Vong lay awake in his bed, the sounds of the sea outside no longer soothing him. The thick fog pressed against the windows, muffling everything but his own thoughts. He couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right with this place. There was an unnatural stillness to Sable Bay, as if the entire province had been caught in some kind of suspended moment, frozen in time. He tossed and turned for what felt like hours, unable to ignore the nagging whispers that seemed to grow louder in his mind. They weren't coming from outside, he realized. The words were inside his head, twisting in his thoughts, calling his name. Vong. Vong. He shot up in bed, gasping for air, his heart pounding. There was no one there. No one in the room with him. The cottage felt empty, just as it had since he'd arrived. But the fog outside, it was heavier now. The air had become thick and oppressive, almost suffocating. Vong pushed the covers off and stood, pacing around the room. He needed to get out. He needed fresh air. Maybe walking along the beach would calm his nerves. He grabbed his jacket, not bothering to change out of his clothes. The night air was cold, biting as he stepped outside. The fog enveloped him immediately, swallowing up the path that led down to the beach. The small cluster of cottages had disappeared behind a curtain of mist, leaving him with only the distant sound of the waves and the occasional creaking of wood. The lighthouse loomed in the distance, its silhouette barely visible against the thick white fog. A flicker of light, the same light he'd seen earlier, danced at the top of the tower. It was faint, almost as though it were flickering like a candle struggling to stay lit. Vong found himself walking toward it without thinking. His legs moved almost mechanically, drawn to the lighthouse by something he couldn't explain. As he walked, the whispers returned, soft, low, like the sound of distant voices carried on the wind. He reached the base of the lighthouse, its ancient stone walls towering over him like a silent guardian. The fog around it seemed denser here, swirling in odd patterns. Vong looked up, trying to make sense of the light flickering at the top. It was as though the lighthouse was calling to him, urging him to come closer. The door at the base of the lighthouse stood slightly ajar, as though inviting him inside. It was an old wooden door, weathered by time and neglect, with rusted hinges that creaked in the wind. Vong hesitated for a moment, the rational part of his mind screaming for him to turn back. But something else, something deeper inside, compelled him to step forward. He pushed the door open with a low groan and stepped inside. The interior of the lighthouse was dark and damp, the air thick with the smell of salt and mildew. A faint light from above cast long shadows on the walls, and the stairs that spiraled upward were narrow, winding, and ancient. The wood beneath his feet creaked with every step, groaning as if the lighthouse itself were alive. Vong didn't know why he was climbing the stairs. His feet moved of their own accord, taking him higher and higher toward the flickering light. The air grew colder with each step, the silence pressing in on him. The only sound was the rhythmic creaking of the stairs and the distant roar of the ocean below. When he reached the top, he stepped out onto the small balcony that surrounded the light. His breath caught in his throat at the sight before him. There, in the center of the balcony, stood a figure. A woman, her back to him, gazing out over the fog-covered beach. Her hair was long and dark, whipping around her face in the wind. She was dressed in an old, faded white gown, like something from another time. She didn't move or speak, but Vong could feel her presence, like a weight pressing down on his chest. He took a cautious step forward. "Excuse me," Vong said, his voice cracking in the silence. "Are you?" The woman turned slowly, her face pale and drawn, her eyes sunken and hollow. There was no expression on her face, just an empty stare that seemed to pierce through him. A chill ran down his spine as he met her gaze. "You shouldn't have come here," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the wind. Vong's heart skipped a beat. Who are you?" he stammered. The woman took a slow step toward him, her movements unnaturally deliberate, as if each step were calculated. Her lips curled into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. The light from the lighthouse flickered one last time, casting her face in sharp contrast, and for a split second, Vong could have sworn her eyes glowed with an unnatural, otherworldly light. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice growing softer. "You're too late." Vong backed away, panic rising in his chest. His mind raced, his heart hammering in his ears. "What do you mean? Too late for what?" The woman's smile faded, her face falling into an expression of sorrow. "It's too late to leave, too late to escape. You've already seen it. The lighthouse has claimed you." The fog around them thickened, swirling more violently now, as if it were alive, closing in on them. The lighthouse itself seemed to pulse with an eerie energy, the light flickering erratically as if trying to warn him, to push him away. Vong turned and ran. He didn't know why. He didn't know what he was running from, but instinct screamed at him to leave, to get as far away from the lighthouse as possible. He rushed down the stairs, his breath ragged and his legs burning with exertion. When he reached the bottom, the fog had deepened, and the silence of the beach was suffocating. The cottages were gone. The road that had led him here was no longer visible. He was completely surrounded by the fog, the world reduced to a hazy blur of white. His heart raced in his chest as the whispers returned, louder this time, growing closer. "Vong." He turned in circles, desperate for a way out, but the fog seemed to shift and move, guiding him deeper into its heart. The whispers were everywhere now, and they were no longer just voices. He could hear other sounds, soft, dragging footsteps behind him, breathing that wasn't his own. A shadow loomed in front of him. Vong froze. In the distance, a figure stood silhouetted against the mist. It was tall, too tall, with long, spindly limbs that seemed to stretch unnaturally. The figure's face was hidden in shadow, but its eyes, if they could be called eyes, glowed with the same eerie light as the woman in the lighthouse. Vong took a step back, his breath catching in his throat. The figure didn't move, but the air around him grew colder, sharper, as if the very fog itself was alive and watching him. "Too late," the voice in his head repeated. "Too late to escape." Part 3, The Whispering Shadows. Vong couldn't breathe. His chest tightened with each passing second as the figure in the mist drew closer. The fog seemed to part around it, like the very air itself was clearing the way for something that wasn't meant to be. The figure stood perfectly still, its long limbs stretching unnaturally, impossibly long, and its face remained obscured, hidden in the shadows of the mist. Too late, the voice echoed in his mind again, colder than before, a whisper that sent ice racing through his veins. He could hear the faintest sounds behind him, footsteps dragging in the sand, slow and deliberate. Then came the unmistakable sound of breathing, shallow and rasping, as though someone, or something, was standing just a few feet behind him. His stomach churned. He didn't dare look back. His feet, though stiff with fear, moved faster, almost against his will, urging him to run. The mist swirled around his legs, thickening, pulling him back. The air was stifling, pressing against his body with an invisible force. He tried to scream but the sound was trapped in his throat. His mouth was dry, his heart thundering in his chest as he stumbled across the beach, his legs giving out beneath him. He collapsed to the ground, gasping for air, the sand beneath him cold and unforgiving. In the distance, the lighthouse light flickered once more, but this time, it wasn't the reassuring flash of a beacon. It was erratic, jagged, like the flickering of a dying candle. Something was terribly wrong. The whispers were getting louder now. Vaughn could feel them crawling under his skin, settling in his mind. The sound was maddening, as if hundreds of voices were calling to him, urging him to come closer, to listen. He forced himself to stand, barely able to keep his balance. The fog was suffocating now, wrapping around his body, clinging to his clothes like a second skin. His vision blurred, and when he blinked, the beach was no longer just a stretch of empty sand. Shapes appeared in the mist, faint figures, barely visible, standing motionless, their faces hidden. They were watching him. They were always watching. The thought pierced his mind like a shard of glass. Panic seized him. His legs trembled as he ran again, stumbling over the uneven sand, desperate to escape the mist, the whispers, the eyes that followed his every movement. He had to get away. He had to. He stopped abruptly, his feet sinking into the sand. In front of him stood the woman from the lighthouse. She was no longer on the balcony, no longer a distant silhouette. She was here, standing only a few feet away, her hollow eyes fixed on his. Her skin was pale, sickly, and her lips were pressed together in a thin, sorrowful line. "You shouldn't have come," she whispered again, her voice soft, but carrying a weight of finality. Vong's throat tightened, his mind racing for answers that didn't come. "What do you want from me?" he choked out, his voice barely above a whisper. The woman's eyes never left him. She took a step forward, and Vong instinctively took a step back. The fog seemed to recede around her, leaving her in an unnatural bubble of stillness. Her presence felt suffocating, as though every inch closer she got to him pulled him deeper into the grip of something dark and ancient. "You're already here," she murmured. "You've seen it. Seen what lies beneath." Before Vong could react, the fog shifted once more, and the figures around him began to take form. They were people, no, they had been people once. Now, their bodies were distorted, twisted in unnatural shapes, their eyes glowing with the same eerie light as the woman's. The beach, once a peaceful retreat, had become a nightmare. The air was thick with the presence of the dead, their souls trapped in this place. Vong's breath came in shallow gasps. What is this place?" His voice cracked as the realization dawned on him. Sable Bay, it wasn't just a quiet beach town. It was a place cursed, where the dead couldn't rest, where the very land itself was haunted by something far older than him. "The lighthouse keeps them," the woman said softly, her voice barely audible over the increasing wind. "It keeps the souls of those who come. The ones who can never leave." Vong took a step back, his heart racing. "I need to leave. I need to get out of here." She shook her head, a mournful expression passing over her face. "You can't. No one ever leaves Sable Bay once they've seen it. Once the lighthouse claims you, you're bound to it. To this place. The fog seemed to intensify again, closing in from all sides, and Vong felt the world around him spin. The figures, the distorted bodies, were closing in on him. Their eyes glowed, brighter now, and their mouths opened in silent screams. Too late to escape. The words repeated in his mind like a chant, echoing against the walls of his sanity. He could feel the presence of the dead all around him, their souls reaching out with invisible hands, pulling at his very being. No, he gasped, the reality of the situation crashing down on him. I didn't mean to. You shouldn't have come, the woman repeated. You shouldn't have come. He could hear the whispers again, louder than before. This time, they weren't in his head. They were coming from the figures around him, their lips moving in perfect synchrony. The sound grew unbearable, pressing in on his skull, making it feel like his mind was about to shatter. Vong's eyes darted around, desperate for any escape, but there was none. The figures were closing in, their arms outstretched, their faces twisted in silent agony. The woman's pale eyes glowed brighter, her voice becoming a distant echo, lost beneath the rising tide of whispers. And then, darkness. Vong's eyes snapped open, but the world around him remained nothing but an oppressive blackness. He tried to move, to call out, but his body was frozen, unable to react. The weight of something unseen pressed down on him, pushing him deeper into the void. His chest tightened, panic clawing at his throat as he struggled against the invisible force that held him captive. It felt like he was submerged underwater, surrounded by the thick, suffocating pressure of the fog that had swallowed Sable Bay. The whispers were back, louder now, as if the very air was alive with the voices of the dead. They spoke in fractured words, their syllables indistinguishable, overlapping with one another, a cacophony of tormented souls. Vong. The voice sounded like his own, twisted and distant. It echoed in his skull, reverberating through his very bones. He didn't understand, couldn't comprehend what was happening. Suddenly, the pressure on his chest lifted. He gasped for air, his lungs filling with the cold, salty taste of the fog. His vision blurred as he blinked rapidly, struggling to regain his bearings. He was no longer on the beach. The ground beneath him was hard and cold, like stone, and the air smelled of decay and rot. The whispers were louder now, and the darkness around him began to shift. Slowly, the shadows took form, solidifying into figures. They were tall, their features warped and grotesque, their eyes glowing faintly in the dark. Vong stumbled to his feet, his body aching from the sudden movement. He tried to make sense of his surroundings, but everything felt wrong. The shapes around him were distorted, their outlines shifting as if they were made of smoke. But then, through the murk, he saw something that froze his blood. It was the lighthouse. But not the one he had seen on the beach. This was something older, more ancient, its towering silhouette far more imposing. The light at the top was dim, flickering like a dying star. The stone walls were covered in thick vines, twisting and curling like living things. The entire structure seemed to pulse with a strange energy, as if it were breathing. The figures surrounding him moved, their limbs contorting unnaturally as they took a step closer. Vong felt an overwhelming urge to flee, but his legs were like lead, unable to move. The whispers grew louder, more frantic. They were no longer distant, they were inside his head, pressing against his thoughts. Too late. You've seen it. You can never leave. One of the figures, a man with a gaunt face and hollow eyes, stepped forward. His skin was stretched thin, his body twisted and broken in ways that made Vong's stomach churn. The man's mouth opened, and the words that came out were not words at all, but a low, guttural growl, a language that sounded like the death throes of something ancient and forgotten. Vong tried to speak, but no words came out. His throat was dry, his voice caught in his chest like a stone. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what was happening. The lighthouse, the woman, the figures, it was all connected. But to what end? The man's face contorted into a twisted smile, revealing teeth that were far too sharp, far too long. He reached out a hand, his fingers long and skeletal. As he touched Vong's shoulder, a searing pain shot through him, like fire running through his veins. Vong screamed, but the sound was lost in a crushing wave of darkness that enveloped him. When he awoke again, it wasn't in the void. It was in a room, small and cramped, its walls made of stone, damp and cold to the touch. The air smelled of mildew and salt, like an old cellar. The light was dim, coming from a single flickering candle in the corner, casting eerie shadows on the walls. His body was trembling. His mind was clouded with fragments of memories, visions of the lighthouse, the woman, the figures. He could hear the whispers again, faint, like distant murmurs on the edge of his consciousness. Vong forced himself to sit up, his head pounding. The world around him was blurry, like he was seeing it through a foggy window. His thoughts were disjointed, fragmented. His pulse raced, and his hands shook as he tried to steady himself. A door creaked open, and a figure stepped inside. It was the woman from the lighthouse. Her eyes were hollow, her face pale and gaunt. She was dressed in the same faded white gown, her long, dark hair hanging loosely around her shoulders. She didn't say anything at first. She just watched him, her gaze heavy, her lips pressed into a thin line. Vong tried to speak, but his voice failed him, his throat too raw to form words. She finally moved, slowly, as though every step was deliberate. She knelt beside him, her cold hands brushing his face, sending a shiver down his spine. Her touch was like ice, but there was something strangely familiar about it, something that pulled at his memory, at the edges of his mind, but he couldn't grasp it. "You're awake," she said, her voice distant, hollow. "Good." Vong stared at her, struggling to understand. "What is this place?" he rasped. What's happening to me?" Her expression softened, but only slightly. "This place is where they bring you when the lighthouse chooses you. Sable Bay is a prison for those who wander too close to its secrets." "Secrets?" Vong's voice cracked as he spoke. "What kind of secrets?" She hesitated, her eyes flickering with something unreadable. "The lighthouse doesn't just guide ships," she whispered, her voice almost lost in the heavy silence. "It guards something. Something ancient. And when you come here, you're bound to it. Forever." The weight of her words hung in the air, suffocating him. "You mean I can't leave?" Vong asked, barely able to process the reality of what she was saying. She nodded slowly, her face almost sorrowful. "No one leaves Sable Bay once the lighthouse has claimed them. The souls trapped here, the ones you saw, they were all like you. Travelers, wanderers. They came for a glimpse of the beach, for a vacation, for rest. And now they're bound to this place, unable to leave. Just like you." A chill ran down Vong's spine. "What happens to us? What happens to me?" The woman's lips trembled, her eyes flickering with fear. "You'll become one of them. A shadow. A lost soul, trapped in the mist. You'll wander the beach, unable to leave, watching as others come and go, never able to escape the lighthouse's pull." The silence between them was suffocating. Vong's heart pounded in his chest as the gravity of her words sunk in. He was trapped. There was no escape. And then, as if on cue, the whispers returned. But this time, they weren't just whispers. They were voices, clearer, more distinct, overlapping with one another, rising into a cacophony of screams, laughter, and cries for help. Vong looked toward the door, his chest tightening with dread. The figures, the ones he had seen on the beach, were standing in the doorway now, their hollow eyes fixed on him. Their mouths moved in unison, their voices merging into one terrifying, unholy chorus. "You've seen it. You've seen us." Part 5, The Choice of the Damned. The figures in the doorway stared at Vong with their soulless, glowing eyes. There were too many of them, too many to count, their forms shifting and undulating in the dim light. The woman beside him had become motionless, her face expressionless, her eyes hollow like those of the figures. The voices, those tortured whispers, grew louder, more insistent. They filled his mind, crawling through his thoughts like an infection. The words were no longer a jumble of fragmented syllables. They were clear now, each voice distinct, each one pleading, begging, accusing. You've seen it. You can't leave now. Vong's breath came in short, frantic bursts. His heart raced in his chest, the pounding sound overwhelming everything around him. The cold, clammy feeling of dread wrapped around his body like a vice, making it hard to move, hard to think. He tried to speak, but his mouth was dry. His voice cracked when he tried to say something, anything. The figures continued to stand motionless in the doorway, their eyes unblinking. They seemed to be waiting for something. Waiting for him to do, what? To understand. To accept. He pushed himself off the stone floor, his legs weak, but he managed to stand. The woman next to him didn't move, her face like a mask, her eyes distant and hollow. She was no longer the woman he had seen on the beach, the one who had warned him. She was something else now, something more like the figures in the doorway. What is this place? Vong asked again, his voice barely a whisper, as though speaking any louder might shatter the fragile stillness that surrounded him. The woman finally stirred, her eyes flickering to him, but it was as if she was seeing him from a distance. You still don't understand, she said softly, her voice strangely distant, as though she were speaking from a place beyond herself. You are here because you chose to be. You didn't know it, but you chose it when you stepped onto the beach. Vong's stomach churned. No. I didn't choose this. I just came here for a vacation. His voice shook as he spoke, the denial escaping his lips before he could stop it. You didn't choose this, but you chose to come, she said, her voice growing colder. Sable Bay doesn't let anyone go once they've seen what lies beneath. Once the lighthouse calls, you are bound to it. You are part of the cycle now. Vong stepped back, shaking his head. No. I can't be. The woman's eyes grew sad, but there was something else, something darker. You are. Just like all of us. Just like everyone before you. The whispers grew louder, swirling around him, suffocating him. You'll be one of us soon. You'll never leave. Vong's mind began to spin, and he tried to focus, tried to remember the warning he had received before. There had to be a way out, didn't there? There had to be. A figure from the doorway stepped forward, its twisted form moving closer. The rest of the figures remained motionless, their eyes watching, waiting. Make your choice, the figure said, its voice low and guttural, like the sound of old stones scraping together. You can join us. Become part of the lighthouse. The fog will swallow you, and your soul will be bound here, forever. You will walk the beach, a shadow of the living, and wait for the next fool to wander too close. Vong's breath hitched. The weight of the figure's words pressed down on him, crushing him. He felt sick to his core, like something inside him was dying, something that he couldn't control. The figure reached out a hand, its long, bony fingers brushing against his arm. The touch was cold, like death itself. Or you can fight it, the figure whispered. Fight against the lighthouse. You may never escape, but you can make the others suffer. You can make them remember what they were. A strange and dark temptation crept into Vong's heart. The idea of fighting back, of tormenting the others who were trapped here, even if it was only to ease his own suffering, it felt wrong, but it also felt like the only way he could take control. But something deep within him rejected that thought. He couldn't become like them. He couldn't let this place change him. The darkness, the weight of the lighthouse, was already pulling at him, but he refused to give in. Fight it, the figure urged again, its voice growing more insistent. You can make it stop. But you have to choose. Vong's mind reeled as the decision tore at him. The fog outside the room grew thicker, pressing against the stone walls, suffocating the light. The figures around him closed in, their faces now twisted into grotesque expressions, their eyes glowing with anticipation. Choose. Choose now. The woman's voice cut through the din of whispers. Vong, she said, her voice soft but filled with finality. This is the price. This is the only choice you have left. He felt a shudder run through him, and for the first time since he had arrived, he understood. He was standing at the edge of something horrible. Something he could never undo. And the choice was his to make. There was no escape from Sable Bay, there was no running from the lighthouse. The whispers had told him the truth: once you see what lies beneath, you are trapped. And now, he was no different from the others who had come before him. Please, Vong said, the word slipping from his lips as a plea, a cry for mercy, though he knew none would come. I don't want this. I don't want to be a part of it. The woman's eyes softened, but her voice remained cold. You've already made your choice. You've already seen what lies beneath. The figure that had spoken earlier stepped closer, his face now twisted in a grin, sharp and predatory. Then it's time for you to join us. Part 6, The Unraveling. The air in the room grew colder, almost unbearably so, as the figure's skeletal hand hovered just above Vong's shoulder. His heart raced, his chest tight with the weight of the moment. Every muscle in his body screamed for him to fight, to flee, but there was no escape. The walls felt as though they were closing in, the figures around him becoming more tangible, their presence suffocating, and the whispers were endless now, clawing at the edges of his sanity. Join us. Join us and embrace your fate. You are one of us now. Vong squeezed his eyes shut, but the images, the voices, the sensations didn't stop. He could feel the weight of eternity pressing on him. He was already part of this cursed place, wasn't he? The decision had been made for him the moment he stepped onto the sands of Sable Bay. But there had to be a way to resist. There had to be something. Please, he gasped, his voice trembling, barely audible over the oppressive whispers. I don't want to be like you. I don't want to be lost. The figure's grin twisted further, his face warping with malicious joy. You're already lost, Vong. You've seen it, felt it. The lighthouse has claimed you, just like it has claimed the others before you. You can't outrun it. You can't hide from it. The woman at his side, her once soft and pleading eyes now as hollow as the others, placed a cold hand on his arm. Her touch was like ice, but it grounded him. You have to accept it, she whispered. The more you fight, the worse it will be for you. No, Vong said with renewed desperation, his breath coming in shallow gasps. There must be a way out. There must be something. You don't understand. The woman's voice was tinged with sorrow, but it was almost a warning. There is no way out. Sable Bay is a prison, and the lighthouse is its warden. The souls here are bound to it, to its endless cycle. The moment you see the truth, you become part of it. There is no escape. Vong's stomach churned. He wanted to scream, to lash out, to deny it all, but deep down, he knew she was right. His mind kept drifting back to the moment he had first seen the lighthouse, when the light had called to him. It had been an invitation. An invitation he had foolishly accepted. The figure stepped closer, its voice a low growl now. You can try to fight, but you will only become like us. We were once alive, too. We were once like you, lost, wandering. And now we are part of the lighthouse, part of the curse. And you will be, too. There is no choice, Vong. You're already dead. The words hit him like a physical blow. His knees gave way, and he collapsed to the ground, unable to hold himself up any longer. The weight of the truth pressed down on him with an unbearable force. He had tried so hard to deny it. He had searched for an escape, but the more he struggled, the more he realized there was no way out. Sable Bay wasn't just a place, it was a curse, a prison for souls who had wandered too close, too curious, and had seen the lighthouse's true nature. The figures around him were the damned, the lost. They had once been like him, people who had come here for rest, for vacation, for something peaceful. But Sable Bay had swallowed them whole, and now they were bound to it forever. Vong felt the fog in his mind deepen. The whispers became clearer, louder, more frantic. They were reaching for him now, pulling at his very essence. Join us. Become one with the lighthouse. He clenched his fists, trying to push the thoughts away. But the fog was thick, so thick, and the more he resisted, the more it seemed to pull him in. The figures circled him now, their glowing eyes burning into him, their whispers a symphony of despair. Please, Vong pleaded again, his voice cracking. There has to be something I can do. The woman's face softened for a moment, and for the briefest second, Vong saw a flicker of something human in her eyes, something that felt like pity, or maybe sorrow. But then it was gone, replaced by the hollow emptiness that had overtaken her. You have one last choice, she whispered, her voice barely audible. You can join us, accept your fate, and live on in the fog. Or. Vong's eyes snapped to her. Or what? She hesitated. Or you can do the unthinkable. A surge of hope, fleeting and fragile, sparked within him. Tell me. She leaned in closer, her cold breath washing over him. You can destroy the lighthouse. Vong's heart skipped a beat. Destroy it? How? How can I? You can't, she interrupted. Not without the cost. If you destroy it, if you break the cycle, it will end, but so will you. Your soul will be consumed by the lighthouse, and you will never rest. You will be lost forever, wandering the sands, a shadow of what you once were. The weight of her words pressed on him, but the idea of fighting back, the idea that there was something, anything, he could do, stirred something deep within him. Could he really destroy the lighthouse? Could he truly end the cycle? But at what cost? Why tell me this? He asked, his voice hoarse. Why help me? The woman's eyes hardened again, her expression unreadable. I'm not helping you. I'm giving you the choice. It's yours to make now. The figure that had spoken earlier stepped forward, its grin widening grotesquely. Choose wisely, Vong. The lighthouse offers no mercy. You may think you can fight it, but it will never stop. It will always pull at you, always haunt you. It is the true master here. You are nothing but a pawn in its game. Vong's mind raced, his thoughts a blur of confusion and fear. The cost of fighting back was high, perhaps too high. But was living in this eternal nightmare, trapped in a fog, any better? Could he really live like this, watching the world go on while he was forever bound to the lighthouse's curse? He closed his eyes, trying to calm the storm of thoughts inside his head. The whispers, the voices, they were growing louder, more insistent. You have to make your choice. It was clear now. No matter what he chose, he was tied to Sable Bay. The lighthouse had claimed him, and there was no going back. But there was one thing he could do, one thing that might give him a chance at peace. The figure stepped closer, sensing his hesitation. What will you do, Vong? Will you accept your fate, or will you become the one who ends it all? Vong stood up slowly, his body shaking with fear. His mind screamed at him to make the right choice, but there was no right choice. Not anymore. Finally, he took a deep breath. I will destroy it. Part 7, The Path to the Lighthouse. Vong stood at the edge of the stone room, his body trembling with fear and anticipation. The whispers surrounded him, deafening, as if the very air was alive with the tortured souls of the damned. The figures, those lost souls trapped in the fog, were waiting for him to make his final move. Their hollow eyes never left him, their expressions twisted in eerie anticipation. The woman who had once seemed so human, so full of sorrow, stood in the shadows, watching him. Her face was blank now, no longer filled with the flicker of humanity she had once shown. She was nothing more than another pawn in the lighthouse's game. You've chosen, she said, her voice cold and emotionless. Now you must face the consequences. Vong clenched his fists, his knuckles white as the weight of his decision settled heavily upon him. He didn't know what awaited him at the lighthouse, but he was determined to end this nightmare. To free himself from this prison. No matter the cost. Where is it? Vong asked, his voice hoarse. The lighthouse. The woman's eyes narrowed. It is not far from here. But you will not walk alone. The lighthouse will sense you, feel your intent. It will fight you. Let it fight, Vong spat, the words tasting like venom on his tongue. I'm not afraid anymore. The figures in the room stirred at his words, but none of them spoke. They simply watched him, waiting for the inevitable. Without another word, Vong turned and made his way toward the door, stepping into the dark hallway beyond. The air grew colder as he walked, and the walls seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. The whispers followed him, now clearer than ever. You cannot escape. The lighthouse will consume you. He forced himself to ignore the voices, focusing only on the path ahead. He had to reach the lighthouse. There was no turning back now. The hallway twisted and turned, the stone walls seeming to shift and change as he moved deeper into the heart of the island. The fog thickened, swirling around him like a living entity, choking the very life out of the air. But Vong didn't stop. He couldn't. Minutes stretched into hours, or maybe it was the other way around. Time lost all meaning in the suffocating fog. The further he walked, the more he felt the pull, the tug of the lighthouse's dark presence, pulling at him from the depths of the island. And then, just as the last of his resolve began to waver, he saw it. The lighthouse. It rose up from the fog like a dark sentinel, its towering silhouette cutting into the night sky. The faintest light flickered at its peak, casting an eerie glow that seemed to warp the very air around it. The structure was ancient, its stone walls cracked and weathered by time, but there was no mistaking the power that emanated from it. It was alive, pulsating with dark energy. Vong felt a chill run down his spine as he approached. The ground beneath his feet seemed to tremble, as if the lighthouse was aware of his presence, aware of his intent. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, more desperate. Don't do it. You'll never leave. But Vong didn't stop. He had come this far. There was no turning back now. As he reached the base of the lighthouse, the door to the tower creaked open, as though inviting him inside. The darkness within seemed to beckon him, pulling him closer. With a deep breath, Vong stepped inside. The air inside was thick and stale, carrying the scent of decay and rot. The walls were lined with strange symbols, ancient carvings that seemed to shift and move as he passed them. The further he walked, the stronger the pull became, as if the lighthouse was feeding off his fear, drawing him in. He could hear it now, the low hum of the lighthouse, the sound of something ancient and powerful stirring in the depths. It was the source. The heart of Sable Bay. And he was about to destroy it. But as Vong climbed the spiral staircase that wound its way up to the top of the lighthouse, a strange sensation washed over him. The fog outside seemed to be pressing in on the tower, suffocating the light, choking it. The further he climbed, the colder it became, until he felt as though he were walking through ice, his breath coming out in short, visible bursts. The top of the lighthouse was within reach now, and Vong's mind raced. How was he supposed to destroy it? The woman had given him no guidance, no explanation. The only thing she had said was that he had to make the choice. But what choice? He reached the top and stepped out into the open, his breath caught in his throat. The light above him flickered one last time, casting long, dancing shadows across the balcony. And then, in the distance, Vong saw it. The shadow. It was like a wave, rolling toward him from the horizon. The fog parted as it approached, revealing the shape of something massive, something impossible. A dark mass, towering and shifting, its tendrils reaching toward the lighthouse. Vong's heart stopped. The lighthouse wasn't just a building, it was a gateway. A doorway to something far worse than he could ever imagine. Something had been trapped here, something ancient, something that had been waiting. The shadow grew larger, its form becoming more defined. It was a creature, no, a force, and it was coming for him. It was the true power behind Sable Bay, and Vong had unknowingly walked straight into its grasp. The whispers surged in his mind, louder, more urgent than ever. You should have never come. You should have never tried to destroy it. Vong took a step back, but the ground beneath him trembled violently, as if the very island was rejecting him. The fog swirled faster, and the dark shape reached the base of the lighthouse. And then, a voice echoed in his mind. You have made your choice, Vong. The voice was not his own. It was the voice of the lighthouse itself, deep and ancient, resonating in the very marrow of his bones. Vong turned, his heart racing, and saw the shape above him, towering like a nightmare come to life. It was coming for him. Part 8, The Unleashing. The darkness above him was not just a shadow, it was alive. It shifted and slithered in ways that defied logic, a mass of writhing tendrils and vast, formless shapes that seemed to pulse with ancient, unfathomable power. The very air vibrated with a low hum, like the sound of a heartbeat, but not his own. It was something far older, far darker. Vong took a step back, his pulse racing, panic clawing at the edges of his sanity. The light from the lighthouse flickered violently, its steady beam now weak and erratic. He could feel the ground beneath him shaking, the stone beneath his feet vibrating as the island itself seemed to tremble in response to the approaching horror. It was coming. The darkness, whatever it was, loomed closer. The fog parted as it drew nearer, revealing its true form. A massive, grotesque entity, its shape difficult to comprehend. There were no clear boundaries to it, just endless shifting tendrils, eyes that appeared and disappeared, faces that seemed to scream but had no mouths. Its presence was overwhelming, suffocating, like it was consuming the very fabric of reality. The whispers in Vong's mind grew louder, more insistent. You've unleashed it. You've set it free. Vong's breath caught in his throat. This wasn't just a curse. This was a prison for something far worse than the souls trapped in Sable Bay. The lighthouse had been holding it back, keeping it confined, but now, the balance had been shattered. He had made his choice. He had tried to destroy the source of the curse, but instead, he had unleashed something far more terrifying. The creature above him seemed to grow, filling the sky with its monstrous form. Its tendrils reached out, lashing through the fog, a dark storm that bent reality around it. Vong staggered backward, his mind reeling. He could feel the pull of the creature, its presence pressing down on him like a physical weight. It was as though it were trying to invade his very thoughts, to consume him from the inside out. No. I can't let it. I can't. He didn't know how much time had passed since he had first climbed the stairs, but the moment the creature had fully materialized, the air around him had changed. The lighthouse had ceased to be the source of the power, it was now a beacon, drawing this monstrous force toward it. Vong spun around, his eyes searching frantically for any way to fight back. The light above him flickered weakly, casting strange, uneven shadows. But there was nothing. The dark figure in the sky was closing in, its mass becoming more solid, its tendrils now reaching down toward him, toward the top of the lighthouse. It's too late, the whispers echoed, their voices rising in a cacophony. You can't stop it now. You never could. Vong's heart pounded. This was his fault. He had thought he was saving himself by destroying the lighthouse, but all he had done was open a door to something far worse. The creature, whatever it was, had been waiting, and now it was free. And it was coming for him. But as he stumbled back toward the edge of the lighthouse's balcony, something caught his eye. In the distance, through the fog, he saw another light, another lighthouse. The light was faint but steady, casting its glow through the thick mists, far off on the horizon. Hope. A sliver of it. It was the only thing that kept him from losing himself completely. Vong's mind raced. Could it be another lighthouse? Could it be another way out? Another chance? The creature above him roared, the sound shaking the very foundation of the lighthouse. The tendrils of darkness shot downward, like a wave crashing over a cliff, and Vong could feel the pressure building, the space around him warping as if time itself was bending. He had to move. Without thinking, without any plan, he bolted toward the far edge of the balcony. His heart was in his throat as he leapt, jumping with all the strength he had left, hoping to reach the light in the distance. The fog was thick, but he saw it now, the faint glow. It was a beacon, pulling him, calling him. He fell through the fog, the world spinning, the cold air whipping at his face. His body crashed into the rough ground, his vision blurred with the impact, but he didn't stop. His legs burned, his body screamed with exhaustion, but he pushed himself to his feet. The light, so close now. It was real. It had to be. But as Vong moved through the dense fog, he felt it again, the pull. It was getting stronger. The darkness, the creature, was still behind him, its presence like a cold hand on his back, urging him forward, chasing him. The whispering voices grew louder, more desperate. You cannot outrun it. You cannot escape the lighthouse. Vong stumbled forward, his breath ragged, his vision swimming as the fog thickened once more. But the light, it was just ahead. He could almost reach it. And then, he saw it. A figure standing in the light. A woman. The woman who had spoken to him in the lighthouse, the one who had warned him. Her face was the same, but there was something different about her now. She wasn't just a soul trapped in the fog. She was standing in the light, alive, her face filled with an expression he couldn't quite place, something between hope and sorrow. Help me! Vong cried out, his voice breaking with desperation. The woman's eyes flickered with recognition, and for a moment, he thought she might reach out to him. But then, a look of horror crossed her face. She stepped back, shaking her head. No, she whispered, her voice distant, barely audible. It's too late. Vong's heart sank. What do you mean? Please, help me. The lighthouse, the creature, it's coming for me. The woman's gaze darkened, and for a fleeting moment, Vong saw something far worse in her eyes than anything he had witnessed before. Her lips parted, and the truth, terrible and undeniable, ripped through him like a blade. The lighthouse isn't just a prison for souls, she said, her voice cold and detached. It's the gateway to the darkness. It feeds on the lost, and it lets the creature through. The creature you unleashed, is its master. Vong's breath caught in his throat. What are you saying? The curse, the lighthouse. It was meant to keep it contained. All of us who came here, we were meant to keep it at bay. But you, Vong, you've broken it. You've set it free. The ground beneath him trembled as the creature drew closer. Now, she whispered, her voice breaking. It's coming for you. For all of us. Part 9, The Final Reckoning. The woman's words echoed in Vong's mind as he stood there, unable to move, unable to fully grasp the horror of what he had just heard. The creature, the force he had unknowingly unleashed, it wasn't just a mindless nightmare. It was the master, the true power behind Sable Bay. And now that it was free, there was no stopping it. The ground shook beneath his feet again, stronger this time. He could feel it, the creature's presence, its hunger, its cold, infinite malice creeping through the fog, reaching for him, for all of them. Help me! Vong screamed, his voice hoarse and broken. What do I do? How do I stop it? The woman's face twisted in agony, her eyes filled with something Vong had never seen before, fear. She stepped back slowly, as if the very air around her was becoming toxic. You can't stop it, she whispered, her voice hollow. You never could. Not now. Not after what you've done. Vong's heart pounded in his chest. The fog was thickening around him, closing in like a vice, pressing in from all sides. The light from the distant lighthouse flickered again, growing dimmer as the creature's tendrils reached out for it, swallowing its glow in darkness. No, Vong said, shaking his head. I can't just give up. I have to do something. The woman's expression softened, but there was no pity in her eyes. Only resignation. You've made your choice. Now you must face it, she said, her voice carrying the weight of 1,000 lost souls. The lighthouse was meant to hold it back, to keep the creature contained. It was never meant to be destroyed. Vong took a step forward, his eyes desperate. Then what do I do? How can I make this right? The woman's lips trembled, as if she were about to speak, but then she stopped, her eyes darting toward the dark mass in the sky. The creature's tendrils were growing thicker, stretching out like dark rivers that flooded the air with a choking sense of doom. And then she whispered the only thing that mattered now. The only way to stop it, is to make a choice. A sacrifice. The words hit Vong like a physical blow. His mind raced. A sacrifice, he repeated. What kind of sacrifice? The woman's eyes darkened. The lighthouse is not just a prison. It's a vessel, a conduit for this force. A conduit you can't destroy, because it's part of you now, part of what you are. The only way to break the cycle is for the one who unleashed it to take its place. You must become the keeper, Vong. You must bind yourself to the lighthouse. Vong's breath caught in his throat. You mean, become like you? Like all of you? Yes, she said, her voice resigned. But worse. You will lose yourself completely, your memories, your identity. You will become part of the lighthouse's curse, its eternal warden. You will keep the creature contained, but you will never be free. You will never be able to leave. Vong stumbled back, shaking his head in disbelief. No. There has to be another way. The woman's gaze softened. There is no other way. The creature you've unleashed is bound to this place, to the lighthouse. If you do nothing, it will consume everything. It will tear apart the fabric of reality, not just here, but everywhere. All that exists will fall under its power. The air around Vong grew colder. His breath came in shallow bursts. He was running out of time. The creature roared in the distance, and Vong could feel its presence growing stronger. The fog pressed in, the very earth beneath him trembling as if it were alive. The lighthouse itself seemed to resonate with an ominous energy, the ground beneath his feet vibrating with power. You can't escape it, the woman said softly. It will find you. It will find all of us. The moment you break the seal, it will rise. There is no place to run. Vong's mind was spinning. His hands shook with fear and uncertainty. The weight of his decision crashed down on him. He had tried to end the curse. He had thought he could destroy the lighthouse, destroy the source of the nightmare, but now he saw the truth. He had unleashed something far worse. What happens if I don't? Vong whispered, his voice barely audible. What if I refuse? What if I run? The woman's expression twisted with sorrow. It will consume you. It will break you down, piece by piece, until there's nothing left. And then, it will find the next one. And the next. Until all of Sable Bay is lost. Vong could feel the darkness closing in. The fog had thickened, and the creature was no longer a distant shadow in the sky. It was real, tangible, and it was coming for him. He could feel its hunger, its pull, like a vice tightening around his chest. He turned toward the distant lighthouse, now barely visible through the fog, the light flickering weakly. The sacrifice was the only way to contain it. But at what cost? His heart felt like it was being ripped apart. The lighthouse, the curse, the creature, everything was connected. Everything was part of a twisted, endless cycle. And Vong was at the center of it. There is no way out, is there? Vong whispered, his voice breaking. The woman shook her head slowly. No. Vong's mind raced. He had to make a choice. He could take the place of the lighthouse's warden, seal the creature away, and keep the cycle going for eternity. Or he could refuse, and let the creature consume everything. But there was no escape. No easy way out. With a deep breath, Vong stepped forward, toward the faint glow in the distance. He had to do something. The creature was almost upon him, its tendrils now visible, reaching for him like a dark storm. "I'm sorry," Vaughn whispered, his words more to himself than anyone else. "I have no other choice." And with that, he plunged into the fog, toward the light, toward the darkness he had unleashed. Toward the only way to stop it. Part 10, The Final Sacrifice. The fog closed in around Vaughn like a suffocating blanket, the darkness pressing down on him with each step. His mind was a whirlwind of fear, regret, and confusion, but above it all, one thought rang clear: there was no escape. The lighthouse was the only choice, the only way to stop the creature from consuming everything. The cost of that choice, though, was far worse than anything he had ever imagined. He couldn't shake the image of the woman's face, the fear in her eyes, the sorrow that had twisted her features. She had been trapped in the cycle for so long, and now he was about to take her place. It was a fate worse than death. And yet, there was no alternative. The creature was close, its presence overwhelming. The whispers of the lost souls, the voices of those who had come before him, filled his mind, urging him on. "It's too late to stop now, Vaughn. You cannot run from the truth. You've already made your choice." The whispers grew louder, more insistent, as if the very fog around him were alive, wrapped in the essence of the curse itself. He couldn't turn back. Not anymore. Ahead of him, through the thickening fog, the faint glow of the lighthouse grew brighter. It pulsed, like a heartbeat, steady and unyielding. It was the source of the creature's power, and now it was calling him. He could feel its pull, a gravitational force drawing him closer. As he neared the base of the lighthouse, the ground beneath his feet trembled, the air thick with a sense of inevitability. The creature was there, just beyond the fog, its tendrils stretching out, reaching for him. Its presence was suffocating, cold, and its hunger was palpable. The door to the lighthouse opened slowly, creaking on ancient hinges, revealing the darkness within. Vaughn's breath caught in his throat. He had come this far, but now, standing on the precipice, he didn't know if he could go through with it. The choice, the sacrifice, was too much to bear. To take the place of the warden, to become the eternal keeper of the lighthouse, losing everything, his memories, his identity, his very soul. But as he stood there, frozen, a thought pierced through the fog of his mind. If he didn't do this, if he didn't become the keeper, the creature would escape. It would consume everything, not just Sable Bay, but the world beyond. The curse would spread, unstoppable, infinite. The creature roared, its voice reverberating through the fog, a deafening, primal sound that shook the very air. It was coming for him. The time to decide had come. Vaughn stepped forward, his heart pounding, his every instinct screaming to run. But he didn't. He couldn't. He entered the lighthouse. The interior was as he had seen it before, ancient and worn, the stone walls lined with strange symbols, their meanings lost to time. The air inside was thick with the scent of decay, as if the lighthouse had been waiting for this moment, for him, for centuries. At the center of the room stood the altar, the heart of the lighthouse. A pulsing orb of light sat at its core, glowing faintly, surrounded by twisting runes and arcane symbols. It was the source, the core of the curse, the link between the creature and the lighthouse itself. Vaughn felt a sharp pain in his chest, as if the very air in the room was pressing down on him. The whispers grew louder, more urgent. The creature was almost here. He approached the altar, his hands trembling. He could feel the energy in the air, the dark force that had kept the creature trapped for so long. He could feel the weight of the decision pressing on him, crushing him. A figure appeared in the shadows, emerging from the darkness. It was the woman again, her face pale and drawn, but her eyes were softer now, filled with a strange, almost comforting sadness. "You have to do it," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the growing roar of the creature. "There's no other way." Vaughn nodded slowly, his heart heavy. "I know." He reached out toward the orb of light, his fingers brushing against its surface. The energy surged through him, like a current of electricity, and for a moment, he thought he might be torn apart by it. But then, a wave of understanding washed over him. This was his fate. He had no choice. The curse had chosen him, just as it had chosen all those who had come before him. The lighthouse was not just a prison, it was a living thing, and it needed a keeper. It had always needed a keeper. Vong closed his eyes, taking a deep breath, and with a final, gut-wrenching cry, he pressed his hands into the orb. Pain erupted through his body, searing through his skin, twisting his insides as if the very fabric of his soul was being torn apart. He screamed, his voice swallowed by the roar of the creature outside, but it was no use. He couldn't stop it. The world around him seemed to dissolve, the lighthouse fading into nothingness as the pain intensified. He felt himself slipping away, losing himself, becoming one with the lighthouse. His memories, his identity, everything that had once been Vong was being erased. But in that moment, something else happened. A flicker of light, a spark of warmth, broke through the darkness. A memory, a feeling, distant but strong, came rushing back. It was the beach. The sun on his skin, the sound of the waves crashing, the warmth of the sand between his toes. He remembered the carefree joy of his vacation, the laughter of his friends, the feeling of being free. And then, as if the memory had awakened something deep inside him, Vong understood. The lighthouse wasn't just a prison. It was a place of balance, of protection. The creature could never fully escape, not while the keeper stood watch. The sacrifice wasn't just about containment. It was about preserving something greater, something that the creature would never understand. Vong let go of the orb. The pain ceased. The lighthouse stood silent. The creature, its tendrils still writhing outside, seemed to pause, as if confused, its dark form faltering for just a moment. And then, with a roar of frustration, it withdrew. The fog lifted, the world outside the lighthouse slowly returning to its natural state. The island seemed quieter now, as if the balance had been restored. The curse that had gripped Sable Bay was broken. The creature was contained. And Vong had become the lighthouse's keeper. The end. In the end, Vong made the ultimate sacrifice to save the world from the creature's wrath. But his journey was far from over. He would remain the eternal warden of the lighthouse, his memories fading, his identity dissolving, but the knowledge of the sacrifice he had made would remain deep within him, as it would for all those who had come before him. The curse of Sable Bay was broken, but the cost was steep. Vong would never be the same.